The rain had just stopped, leaving Lagos glistening under a swollen sun. The streets steamed, car horns blaring in a chaotic rhythm only Lagosians seemed to understand. Dr. Ifeoma Adesanya sat in her clinic, the office quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. At 54, she had earned a reputation that few could rival: professional, exacting, and respected in every corner of the medical community. Patients trusted her. Colleagues admired her. And yet, she felt an itch in her life she could no longer ignore, a small emptiness hidden beneath her meticulous routines. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or so she thought, until he walked in. He was young, perhaps 28 or 29, but his presence felt deliberate, magnetic even. His shirt clung slightly from the humid Lagos air, sleeves rolled up to reveal arms toned in a way that betrayed time at the gym. Dark eyes met hers with a mixture of vulnerability and boldness, the kind of gaze that unsettles and entices all at once. "Good afternoon, doctor," he said, his voice low, smooth, almost musical against the backdrop of the clinic's soft lighting. "Good afternoon," she replied, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She noticed the subtle nervousness in the way he shifted from foot to foot. The kind of nervousness that made a professional like her want to calm it, to hold the situation firmly in her hands, but also, in some inexplicable way, made her pulse quicken. His file showed a minor heart condition, nothing life-threatening, yet requiring careful monitoring. She had seen hundreds like him before. And yet, as she approached him, as her hand brushed against his to take the clipboard, a spark of awareness jolted through her. She felt it, the inexplicable electricity of someone entering your life and quietly rewriting the rules. Over the next few minutes, she conducted the routine examination, her professional mask firmly in place. She spoke in measured tones, asked precise questions, noted his vitals. But each time his eyes flicked toward hers, a strange warmth crawled up her neck. She caught herself smiling at things she normally would have ignored, a subtle joke he made, a nervous laugh that softened the edges of her otherwise rigid control. By the time the consultation ended, she realized she had lost track of her usual detached composure. She told him the next steps for treatment, scheduling follow-ups, giving advice with the practiced efficiency of decades of experience. Yet, as he thanked her and turned to leave, she found herself holding her breath. "See you next week," he said, but it was more than a routine farewell. There was an unspoken weight in his tone, an intimacy that made her heart beat faster. She nodded, forcing herself to remain professional. "See you then." After he left, the quiet of the clinic returned, yet something inside her had shifted. She stared at the empty doorway, a lingering warmth curling in her chest. "Why do I feel this way?" she wondered, trying to shake it off as mere fatigue. But deep down, she knew it was not that simple. For the rest of the day, she found her thoughts wandering. The younger man, the patient, appeared unbidden in her mind. The curve of his jaw, the way he laughed softly at his own nervousness, the intensity in his eyes. She chastised herself, imagining her husband, Adewale, waiting at home for dinner. Married for over 25 years, their life together was comfortable, predictable, and secure. Adewale was a good man, steady, reliable, and completely unaware that a storm had begun brewing within his wife. The next week brought a subtle escalation. The patient returned, this time with a minor complaint, nothing serious. But during the consultation, she noticed details she hadn't before: the faint scent of his cologne, the way he leaned slightly closer when she adjusted the stethoscope on his chest, the casual ease in the movement of his hands. Each gesture seemed innocent, yet charged with something she could not name. As she wrote notes on his chart, she felt a strange tension settle in her body, a low hum that pulsed in sync with his presence. She found herself imagining scenarios she would never admit, even to herself: quiet dinners, long walks, laughter exchanged in a world removed from the clinical sterility of her office. "This is wrong," she whispered inwardly, but the thought only made the tension thrum stronger. By the third visit, the unspoken attraction had begun to assert itself more boldly. During a routine check, he mentioned a personal struggle, his voice dipping into a vulnerable cadence that tugged at her instincts. She listened, leaning slightly closer than professional distance required, her mind racing through boundaries she had always maintained without question. She caught herself reaching for his hand under the guise of comforting, noting the electric thrill at the contact. That evening, Dr. Ifeoma sat in her quiet Lagos apartment overlooking the lit skyline, the distant honking and shouting from the streets below a reminder that life continued, indifferent to desire and discretion. Adewale was already asleep, oblivious to the storm stirring within her. She pressed her hands to her face, closing her eyes, attempting to calm a pulse that betrayed more than simple nerves. Why him? She asked herself, almost aloud. Her mind spiraled through the impossible, the moral code she had lived by, the vows she had made, the career she had spent decades building. And yet, in the quiet of her apartment, she admitted a truth she would never speak aloud: she wanted him. And the thought alone was enough to terrify her. The next week, when he arrived for his follow-up, the air between them felt charged, electric. Even the routine vitals took on an intimacy that made her forget herself. Their eyes met repeatedly, lingering longer than professional courtesy dictated. He smiled at something she said, a half-smile that seemed to carry secrets meant only for her. That night, after he left, she lingered by the window, looking at the wet streets glimmering under the streetlights. Lagos had not changed. The city remained bustling, indifferent, alive. But for her, the world had shifted. A line had been drawn, a new possibility had awakened, and she could feel the danger, the thrill, and the excitement coiling inside her chest like a tightly wound spring. She was a respected doctor, a devoted wife, a woman who had always controlled every aspect of her life. And yet, a younger man, vulnerable, charming, and unknowingly bold, had entered her world, and with him, he had brought temptation she could not resist. As she finally turned away from the window, she whispered into the quiet apartment. What have I gotten myself into? The sun was barely over the horizon when Lagos roared to life again, the streets already thick with traffic, the smell of wet asphalt and roasted corn mingling in the humid morning air. Dr. Ifeoma Adesanya arrived at her clinic, her mind still tangled in the memories of the previous week's consultation. She tried to focus on her schedule, on the patients waiting for her expertise, but she couldn't shake the image of him, the young patient whose presence had unsettled her more than she was willing to admit. He arrived precisely on time, as if he sensed her distraction. The moment he entered, her pulse quickened, and she felt the familiar pull she had tried to ignore. Today, however, there was a subtle change in him. His smile carried a new warmth, a hint of recognition, as though he was aware of the unspoken tension that hovered between them. Good morning, doctor, he said, his voice steady but carrying a softness that made her stomach flutter. Good morning, she replied, forcing a professional tone, though she knew it rang hollow. She motioned him to the examination chair, trying to focus on the routine check. Yet every detail, the way he shifted in the seat, the tilt of his head, the faint tremor in his hands, drew her attention away from medical charts and vitals. As she listened to his heartbeat, she noticed how his eyes met hers repeatedly, holding just a fraction longer than necessary. She told herself to concentrate, reminding herself that she had decades of experience controlling situations like this. And yet, a thrill ran through her that she could not deny. Everything seems normal, she said, stepping back and scribbling notes on his chart. But we'll continue to monitor your heart closely. He smiled, a small, almost shy expression that belied a depth she couldn't place. Thank you, doctor. I appreciate your attention to detail. The words lingered in the air longer than they should have. Dr. Ifeoma felt her cheeks warm, and for a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to lean closer, to brush against him under the pretense of adjustment. She chided herself silently. This is dangerous. Impossible. Unprofessional. Yet, by the time their consultation ended, she realized that professionalism had slipped entirely. He lingered by the doorway, seemingly hesitant to leave, and she found herself trapped by the same pull that had shaken her weeks ago. Doctor, he began, then stopped, the hesitation in his voice deliberate, tantalizing. Yes, she asked, her voice softer than she intended. I was wondering if you could give me some advice, outside the office, he said, his eyes not leaving hers. About stress, life, things, personal. Her stomach twisted. She knew the request was innocent, or perhaps deliberately provocative, but it struck at her core. Part of her wanted to say yes, to let this young man's presence guide her into unknown territory. Another part, the one trained to uphold boundaries, screamed no. I can't, she said finally, though her voice betrayed uncertainty. It's not appropriate. He nodded slowly, but there was no disappointment in his eyes, only understanding. Yet the tension, the silent connection, hung heavy in the room, leaving her shaken long after he had left. Later that evening, Lagos glowed under a sky streaked with amber and violet as Dr. Ifeoma returned home. Adewale, her husband, was reading in the living room, the familiar comfort of his presence both grounding and frustrating. She wanted to talk, to confess the turmoil within her, but how could she explain a desire she barely understood herself? Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the balcony, gazing at the twinkling lights of Victoria Island below. The city pulsed with life, indifferent to moral dilemmas or temptation, and she felt a growing ache in her chest, a craving for something forbidden, something thrilling. The next few days were a blur of work and sleepless nights. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the curve of his jaw, the faint nervous laugh, the way he had touched her hand just slightly too long during the checkup. Her mind replayed moments she would never admit to anyone, not her colleagues, not her husband, not even herself. And then, it happened. A medical emergency brought him to the clinic outside of his scheduled appointment. Nothing serious, just anxiety, a panic attack triggered by stress at work. She guided him into the consultation room, her hands steady, her mind racing. "You're safe here," she said softly, the words almost escaping the professional mask she wore. His breathing was rapid, his palms clammy, and instinctively, she reached for his hands. Her fingers brushed his, and a spark ignited, undeniable and dangerous. He looked at her, eyes wide, vulnerable, and for a heartbeat, the clinic ceased to exist. There was only him, her, and the silent pull between them. "Doctor," he whispered, his voice trembling. I'm here," she replied, and something unspoken passed between them, a mutual acknowledgement of desire, of temptation, of a boundary already breached. She knew the line had been crossed. Every fiber of her being screamed to stop, to regain control, to remember her husband, her career, her life built over decades. Yet the magnetic force drawing her toward him was overpowering. She allowed herself a moment, just a moment, to feel what she had denied herself for so long. Later that night, she could not sleep. The image of his face haunted her, each memory of contact a vivid spark that made her pulse race. Adewale slept beside her, unaware, and she felt both guilt and exhilaration. "This is madness," she thought. "And yet, I can't resist him." The following week, they met again, and the tension grew bolder, more intimate. During a routine check, she found herself standing closer than necessary, their hands brushing more deliberately. His gaze lingered, searching, daring, and she realized with a jolt that he was aware of the unspoken desire. "Doctor, I can't stop thinking about you," he said quietly, almost as if confessing a crime. Her chest tightened, and she swallowed hard. This is wrong. So wrong. And yet, she felt the same, a raw, undeniable attraction that threatened to unravel everything she had built. That evening, Lagos streets were slick with rain, reflections of neon signs shimmering in puddles. She walked past a cafe, lost in thought, imagining scenarios that should have been impossible. Their secret meetings, their subtle touches, their forbidden conversations, she craved them all, even as a knot of fear tightened in her stomach. And then, one night, it happened. A simple encounter in the clinic after hours, a conversation about stress, an innocent touch on the shoulder, escalated in a way neither of them planned. He leaned closer, eyes dark with longing, and she did not pull away. A kiss, tentative at first, then deeper, more urgent, ignited a fire she had never known. The sound of the city outside faded. The air conditioner hummed faintly. There was no morality here, no professionalism, no husband, only the raw, aching desire between them. For a moment, Dr. Ifeoma allowed herself to forget everything else, to surrender to the pull that had been building for weeks. But as the kiss ended and he stepped back, reality hit. The line had been crossed. She could no longer pretend that she was in control. Her pulse raced not just from desire, but from fear, fear of discovery, of scandal, of losing everything. She watched him leave the clinic that night, his coat brushing against hers in a way that lingered, and felt a shiver run through her. Lagos had not changed, the city continued in its chaos, indifferent. But for her, the world had shifted. She knew the affair had begun in earnest, and with it, a dangerous game had started, one that threatened her marriage, her career, and the carefully maintained life she had built. And yet, she could not stop thinking about him, the young patient who had awakened desires she had long buried. As she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the rain-slick streets below, she whispered into the quiet. "What am I becoming?" And she knew the answer, someone who was no longer entirely safe, no longer entirely herself. Lagos never slept, and neither did Dr. Ifeoma Adesanya, or so it seemed. Nights were now long, restless, filled with a mix of desire and dread. The affair with her younger patient had begun quietly, almost innocently, but its ripple effects were impossible to ignore. Each meeting left her trembling with exhilaration and guilt, a dangerous cocktail that left her questioning every choice she had made. The city outside her apartment hummed with life, the distant honking of cars and the chatter of street vendors mingling with the beating of her own heart. Adewale remained blissfully unaware, absorbed in his routines, reading papers or tending to minor repairs in their home. She watched him, the man she had loved for decades, and wondered how she could betray him, not because she didn't care, but because desire had become uncontrollable, a storm she couldn't contain. The affair escalated in secret, their encounters hidden between clinic hours, whispered conversations, and fleeting touches in the dimly lit corridors. The young man, Chaik, was intoxicating. His vulnerability, charm, and raw attraction made her feel alive in ways she hadn't in years. Yet, with each stolen moment, the stakes rose. Every glance from a colleague, every late-night phone call, every hushed text carried the weight of potential ruin. It wasn't long before suspicion began to creep into her life. One evening, Adewale noticed her distracted tone, the lingering scent of cologne that wasn't his own. "Ifeoma, is everything okay?" he asked softly, concern etched into his features. She smiled, forcing warmth into her voice. "I'm fine. Just tired from work." But that lie sat heavy in her chest. She knew he could sense the shift, the unspoken tension, the distance that had begun to grow. She loved him, yet she was addicted to something forbidden, something that made her feel alive and dangerously free. The first real warning came when a colleague, Dr. Alyamide, mentioned that a patient had been seen outside of clinic hours. "We need to monitor these follow-ups," he said casually. But for her, the words struck like a hammer. He hadn't seen her with Chaik, but he had noticed the irregular patterns, the late arrivals, the extended consultations. One slip, and everything could unravel. Fear mingled with desire. Every stolen moment felt like both a thrill and a threat. One afternoon, Chaik arrived, flustered, apologetic. "Ifeoma, I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his dark eyes searching hers for reassurance. Her chest tightened. We shouldn't," she whispered, but her body betrayed her words. They were close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the pull between them undeniable. He reached for her hand, and she did not resist. The tipping point came one rainy evening. Lagos streets were slick and shimmering under neon lights as she drove home from the clinic, her mind a storm of guilt and longing. Chaik called, urgent, pleading, and she found herself agreeing to meet him one last time. Not because she wanted to continue the affair indefinitely, but because the craving was unbearable. They met in an empty part of the clinic after hours, the city lights spilling through the windows. One look, one touch, and the air between them ignited. This time, there was no hesitation. The kiss was deeper, more consuming, and for a fleeting moment, the world ceased to exist. No husband, no career, no rules. Just passion. But as the moment ended, reality slammed into her with terrifying clarity. The echo of footsteps in the hallway, the sudden clink of a dropped instrument, it was a reminder of the life she could lose in an instant. She pulled away, heart pounding, eyes wide with fear. "Chaik, we can't," she whispered, trembling. This could ruin everything." I know, he said softly, his own fear mingling with desire. But I can't stay away from you either. The weeks that followed were a tense dance of secrecy and paranoia. She felt herself fraying at the edges, exhausted by the double life she was leading. Adewale's suspicion grew, subtle but undeniable. The young man's presence became a constant ache in her chest, impossible to ignore, yet impossible to fully embrace without consequence. It all came crashing down one fateful night. She returned home late, drenched from Lagos' sudden downpour, and found Adewale waiting. His expression was a mix of hurt and realization. Ifeoma. I know, he said simply, the weight of his words crushing her. Her heart froze. You know, she stammered, disbelief and shame warring inside her. I've felt it for weeks, he said, voice steady but wounded. The distance. The distraction. The late nights. I don't need proof. I just know. The apartment was silent except for the rain hammering against the windows. Dr. Ifeoma felt tears sting her eyes, not from fear of losing her career, but from the potential loss of the man she had shared a lifetime with. I never meant to. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. Adewale shook his head, sadness heavy in his gaze. And yet you did. In the aftermath, she realized the full scope of what she had risked. Her marriage, built over decades of trust and shared experiences, hung by a thread. Her reputation, carefully crafted in Lagos' medical community, teetered on the brink. Even Chike, the man who had awakened desires she had long buried, could not fix the damage that secrecy and passion had wrought. The hardest moment came when she confronted herself. Sitting alone in the clinic after hours, she stared at the empty examination room, her hands trembling. She could still feel Chike's warmth, still smell the faint scent of him lingering in her mind, yet the cost of indulgence had become painfully clear. She had traded certainty for thrill, stability for desire, and the consequences were unavoidable. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. Chike appeared at her apartment unannounced, desperate, pleading for another encounter. Ifeoma. I can't let this end like this, he said, eyes dark with longing and fear. She looked at him, the man she had desired more than she could admit, and finally found clarity. No, Chike. It has to end. It's wrong. For both of us. I love my husband, and I cannot destroy my life, my career, everything I have built, for this. His shoulders slumped, the fight leaving him as quickly as it had flared. I understand, he whispered, and for the first time, the electricity between them vanished, leaving only the hollow ache of what might have been. Weeks later, Lagos returned to its usual rhythm. Dr. Ifeoma focused on her patients, on her marriage, on reclaiming control of her life. The memory of Chike lingered, a bittersweet reminder of passion and temptation, but the storm had passed. She had survived the most dangerous lure of her life and emerged, if not unscathed, then wiser. Adewale noticed the subtle shift, the renewed warmth in her smile, the way she lingered slightly longer at his side in the evenings. Everything okay? He asked one night, his hand brushing hers. She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, carrying the weight of desire and the relief of restraint. Yes, she said softly. Everything's okay. Yet, even in the calm, she knew Lagos had taught her a lesson that would linger forever, that desire could awaken in the most unlikely places, that temptation could strike with relentless force, and that some lines, once crossed, could never be fully erased from memory. The city outside her window continued to pulse with life, indifferent, unstoppable, and endless. And in the quiet of her apartment, Dr. Ifeoma Adesanya allowed herself to breathe, to forgive herself, and to move forward, wiser, stronger, and painfully aware of the fire she had once danced with, and survived.